Hey everybody, welcome to the 20-minute Bible study. I am Vince Miller, and today we're discussing the topic of purity in relationships. You know, the topic of sexual ethics is getting a lot of attention in the press today, but topics and issue of this nature shouldn't surprise us given the increase and even constant bombardment of sexual themes on radio, television, and the prolific presence of pornography all over the web. And it raises the question in an age of, sexual bombardment, how should a man of God conduct himself with others in life? Or rather, what is God's plan for purity? Number one, God's standard has always been and will be not a hint. You know, Paul in Ephesians 5:3-4 demands not even a hint of sexual immorality. This is the standard for a follower of Christ. We don't need any social movement to define this for us because God has given us the not a hint mandate. This implies impurity of any kind, including sexual impurity, is just not compatible with God's plan nor our holiness. And while contemporary radio and television and the web attempt to redefine these boundaries by turning sexual acts, innuendos, and joking into entertainment, this does not infer that their limits or lack of them are appropriate conduct for followers of Christ. Two, purity is always the aim. Not a hint means that our relationships with women are to be pure and respectful as if all women are our relatives and siblings, mother or grandmother for that matter. We should be protective of women who are made in God's image as if we're relatives to them. Never exploitive, condescending, or treat them as objects. In fact, as Christians, we're called to treat all people with honor and respect. And whenever a relationship with a woman other than our spouse becomes sensitive or suggestive or sensual or sexual in talk, we should back out, regardless the cost, because it's a violation of God's standard of purity. Three, locker room talk is never acceptable. You know, both men and women are capable of vulgar sexual conversations with friends. You have heard both genders engage in hypersexual talk. Men often write it off as locker room talk, as if there's a place where such language and conversation is acceptable. We do this because we falsely believe the lie that men will be men. But if the standard is that our lives display not even a hint of sexual immorality or impurity, this is not a conversation that we should ever be party to. Locker room talk has no place in the life of a godly man. So when we return, we'll be joined by a special guest and, again, another good friend who will help us to dig into this topic a little bit more.
Get your day started right. Sign up for the Men's Daily Devotional at mensdevo.org. That's mensdevo.org. They're short, sweet, and to the point. Read them and share them with the men you know. And get into God's Word daily.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. So glad to have you here and joined today by Mark Beaver. Thanks for being with us, bud.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so realtor extraordinaire, right? That's part of your living, right?
Yeah, I try to be, yeah.
Yeah, you do a great job at it, actually. So thanks for being with us. You know, today we get to talk about purity. How about that?
Yeah.
It's a topic everybody wants to talk about for some reason. And I know that, purity is a problem for men as much as it is for women, actually, and especially purity in relationships. I think when it comes to marriage or family or just general relationships, I think this is one of the big struggles that I think men face predominantly. At least it is very talked up today more than any other conversation I'm hearing around men. But I need to ask you, and maybe you have a guess at this, why is it so? Why is purity such an issue for guys?
Well, I think it's such a big problem because it's displayed everywhere we look. I mean, it's in the music we listen to, the TV shows we watch, the movies we watch, the people we hang around. It's all over the place.
Yeah, we sure are infiltrated with impure thoughts almost everywhere we go.
Absolutely.
Even I know in your marketplace, there's probably a lot of impure thinking, and it's not just about sexuality either. It's just impure thoughts in general about life and integrity and how to lead and how to make money, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we live in I would say, a hyper-sexualized society that at one time was not like this.
Right.
Even though if you start to reach back into the Old Testament, there was a lot of hypersexual activity that was definitely happening in biblical times, right? But it's been a very predominant conversation. Why do you think it's so? I mean, why do you think that impurity has really risen to the level of awareness that it has for pastors, for leaders, for business people, for men? Why do you think this is such an issue today?
Well, I think it's more open. I mean, people can see every move you make now with social media. Everyone's waiting for you to mess up. I mean, if you say you're a Christian, somebody's watching you. They want you to mess up. They want to make it known that what you believe in is false because you sinned against your own beliefs. So I mean, it's just all over the place with social media exposure. Everything, it's made cool in the mainstream.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that is, I think you're making two really great points. Our access to things that lead to impure thoughts, right, is greater than it's ever been.
Right.
I mean, we can view anything at any time, anywhere. I mean, my kids with a phone in their hand at very young ages can view things that are totally inappropriate for them to view. And they almost have open access to it regardless of what kind of filter I put on. Right.
Yeah, there's always ways around them.
Yeah, exactly. So. And then the things that people are saying inside of those resources, like you're talking about, is the other end of the spectrum that we're all being put to the test around this whole thing. And those two issues together have combined for a huge impact to how we view life and even the purity of our thoughts, So, I mean, it's hard to get away from any kind of impurity, but especially sexual impurity, I think, in our world today.
Right.
Because of its prevalence, because it's everywhere, because it's being displayed, because it's even being talked about in different ways than it used to. We have an exposure to it. But the funny thing is, actually, Paul has something to say about this, and I think this one verse from 1 Corinthians 6:18, which I want to read for us, kind of sums it all up. And I really want you to hear it and just respond naturally to what Paul says. He says, "Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body." So let me just ask you, in the first time you're now hearing this, what really stands out to you about what Paul is saying there?
The sexual sin is a sin against your own body, and every other sin is outside of the body. I think that's just a really neat way to put it. I mean, because every sin you commit outside of your body, harms other people or can harm other people. But when you sin sexually, it's against your own self, your own temple. So. Yeah,
it's interesting that this is a sin that affects us in a very different way than other sins, right? And the funny thing about, I think, sexual sin, it's not funny, but the ramifications of sexual sin seem to have deep roots, right, that are irreconcilable, that sometimes leave collateral damage that can't be undone, right? And so this whole idea of Paul saying, flee from the intense ramifications like you're talking about of sin against yourself is very important. And he's like, flee, which is an aggressive word for run, like run as fast as you possibly can from these moments, because the impact of it is, it's got a dreaded, serious impact for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I mean, it is a sin against yourself, but like you said, there's other ramifications, I mean, family, financial, everything is affected by it.
And you've seen this. You've seen this impact people's lives, right?
I've had close friends, think they wouldn't get caught, but you always get caught.
Yeah.
It always comes out in the end.
Yeah,
it does. The effects on your relationships with, your wife or your husband, your kids, your immediate family, in-laws, all that is affected. Your work. I mean, there's nothing that goes untouched.
Yeah. It's weird, too, how it's just a small amount of impurity can lead to a person taking another step and another step and another step and another step. Because just like as you're talking and thinking about friends that a form of sexual immorality has impacted because they've gotten themselves so far down a road, I was thinking about guys who just casually are looking at pornography to taking the next step where they casually get involved in an emotional relationship with another woman, who get caught, guys who get caught viewing pornography at home and their wife or their kids catch them, guys that have taken it to the next step where they've viewed child pornography and are now doing prison time for the ramifications from their sin. Marriage is destroyed, relationships destroyed, financial burdens that come with that. And things that can't ever be undone, right? So these are all huge ramifications that come from the sin, but still, it's a sin against a body and your body, which is really interesting to me. And I don't know if I understand what that truly means, but I can understand this one part. You're supposed to flee from it. Yeah. You're supposed to run from it aggressively as hard as you can. And I don't think we always do that. No. Do we, Mark?
No.
I mean, what does it look like, do you think, for a guy to flee from these impure thoughts? Let's not talk about the bodily ramifications of the sin against your own body or even getting caught. Let's talk about what it means to flee from this. What does that look like, do you think?
Well, I mean, the image that comes to my mind immediately is somebody running away. But in a practical way, I guess, like you mentioned, the locker room talk, just not joining in the conversation. Not having any input, walking away from that conversation if you know it's going to be enticing to you to join in. If you're in a workspace where there's other people of the opposite sex, and something's said, ignore it, or stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I find myself, the more that I interact with people who aren't Christians, I find myself in more of these situations, right? There's a lot of people, like in workplaces, I know sometimes your workplace might be like this sometimes, but where you're in a workplace where someone is actually joking about something, engaging in locker room talk, like we've talked about in the monologue today, where you have to make a decision on how do you take a stand for what you believe in, but not shame the other person, but take a stand for what it is, by fleeing, either it be emotionally, mentally, or physically away from that moment to ensure that you're kind of taking a stand for your faith. And I think that's kind of hard.
Oh, yeah, because, you want to fit in and you want to be, on the in crowd, especially, if it is in a workplace environment, you don't want to make a bad impression on somebody who, could be a higher up to you. Mm-hmm.
Or you don't want to compromise your ability to climb the ladder, kind of like you're saying, like you feel like you're on the precipice of, I got to stand up for what I believe. At the same time, I also live in this world where I'm trying to climb a ladder, where you begin to feel this conflict of values. It's really interesting. And you realize, man, maybe my values don't match with the cultural values of this place. They may match with the mission, but the cultural hidden values here, they don't match with. And I'm at a moment of decision. I'm in a valley of decision right now. Do I continue to live in this culture, or do I choose to flee from it? Those are hard decisions for people to make, both men and women. Have you ever been in a situation like that before?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my industry, there's certain situations that you can put yourself in that, you'll need to walk away from, or, just ignore and kind of put in the back of your head and move on. So exactly.
And so you've kind of referenced a little bit today that, in the monologue, I talk about the 3 points regarding purity and kind of our plan for purity. You referenced the locker room talk piece. I would assume that that's probably one of the greater challenges that you face in your daily life.
Yeah, I would say so, definitely.
Yeah, I'm starting to face that more and more and more, especially as I put myself into situations with guys or in situations where I'm interacting with more non-Christians. I'm finding that kind of maintaining my stand on the things that I believe and the way that I live is hard and challenging. But I find that to be one of the great challenges, is understanding how to lean against that and still be my own person, yet not compromise my values along the way. Let me ask you this. When it comes to your own personal purity, and I'm asking you to be a little transparent here, where do you face challenges in your own personal purity around your thought life, your relationships, just personally?
Well, I would say, my thought life, and then also, going back to just trying to be one of the guys. in my industry, I'm surrounded by people all the time, and conversations come up, or someone will walk by and someone will make a comment, and it's you want to make a good impression on that individual, and maybe it's hard not to join in. So
yeah, and it's funny. I do find those moments challenging. They're a little easier maybe for me than you, and that's all right. That's how we're different. But when I find challenges to my own personal purity is when I have nothing to do, kind of in the emptiness of life.
Sure.
For example, if I've got too much reflection time, sometimes my mind thinks on things that are inappropriate, or thinks about challenges in an inappropriate way, or I just find that sometimes when I have nothing to do, that my mind is always looking for a way to entertain itself.
Boredom.
Yeah, it's in that boredom, right? And I often reflect on David when he was at his palace, walking around the roof of his palace, looking down on Bathsheba. It was in that moment of like reprieve and quietness with nothing to do that his personal purity was the most at test. It wasn't when he was doing something. It was when he was alone and quiet. And really, that is a little bit of it for me. And so I found that I've really got to not just keep myself busy for the sake of being busy, but I'm really challenged in the quietness of life to keep my thoughts pure and to keep them focused on pure things. So, what kinds of steps would you recommend for guys that are struggling with their purity? What would you say to a guy out there that maybe struggled with something like me or something like you? What would you tell those guys today that's maybe a tactic that you've learned along the way that's helped you?
Well, what's helped me is just put parameters on things, like, don't take your phone to bed with you, just don't put yourself in a situation where, know where you're weak, I guess I should say. If you're weak when you're bored, try to entertain yourself, or, be out in a place where it's in public, or, a common area of your house.
That's actually ingenious. I'm so glad that you said that, because I think there is something to the nature of understanding the enemy within, right? Like some guys never take time to do an assessment of that, but understanding the challenges that we face and the way that we challenge them and the times that we challenge them. You probably heard this mechanism before, but, halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Whenever I experience one of those things is when I'm most susceptible to any kind of sin or impurity. And it's true, halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Yeah. When those things start to creep in, and any one of those things start to creep in, we should be doing an assessment on that and ensure that we're not subjecting ourselves to things that are impure during those times. And I think that's probably one of the great challenges that many men face, is really doing an assessment of themselves. So guys, kind of hearing from Mark today, I hope that you're kind of leaning into this a little bit and listening in and beginning to maybe do an assessment of yourself, maybe naturally while we've been talking. And you're thinking about what your sin is, where your impure thoughts lie, and you're trying to find a way to flee from it. Maybe the beginning of fleeing from it might be doing some form of like personal assessment of who you are and how you face off with impurity and what it looks like when you get yourself there, and then running from those moments. Basically, that's it. Let's keep it real simple. Running from those moments after you do those assessments. So I'd encourage you guys this week to think about that a little bit, to ponder over it, maybe have a discussion, just like Mark and I did today with another guy. So thanks for being with us again, guys. Continue to do life all in, and we'll see you right back here next time.